The following video is merely a short documentation on a few of my findings researching the Western Sahara and the conflict that surrounds it. It serves as a means of furthering knowledge on the Western Sahara region and its unique history before, during and after colonial rule. It is important to remember that the territory that is going to be discussed has a few key points in terms of exports. In particular, we should note that the main commodity is its phosphate reserves, which have been particularly attractive to Spain in colonial times and the Moroccan government today. And fishing is another commodity that has to be considered in the region, with the Western Saharan coastline being particularly notable in the Iberian Peninsula and 2% of the Moroccan GDP today. While these are important facets to consider in this video, they should not mistake one into thinking that the issue could be largely boiled down to those two facets alone, as the third and largest factor continues to be political. As always, do your own research, please. Oped Bapela was axed from his position at the African National Congress's National Executive Committee following his Moroccan trip late last year. You'll find many articles holding similar messages, which all came about as Mr. Bapela went to Morocco, which reportedly was not an official ANC mission, according to the organization, wherein he called for strong economic ties with the Northern African state and reintroduction into the African Union. When I first read this, I was clueless as to why this was the case, other than the added line in every article referencing the party's position on Morocco and Western Sahara. This triggered three questions. Number one, what was the ANC's position on Morocco? Two, why was Morocco not in the African Union? And third, what was the issue with Western Sahara? All three questions deserve their own video, but for me, the greatest question, and one that seems to be at the heart of the issue, is the very last one, as it also relates back to the ANC and the African Union, which is the question of what is the issue with Western Sahara. Before we begin the discussion, we're going to have to go way back to when the Western Sahara was known as the Spanish Sahara. Now, the Western Sahara has largely been an issue of contention for four groups, that being the Spanish during the period as a colonial power, Mauritania, the Moroccan government or Moroccan monarchy, whichever you so wish to choose for the purposes of this discussion, and the indigenous inhabitants, that being the Sahrawi people. Now, for the purposes of this video, more prominently the sake of its length, we will limit the discourse to the 20th and 21st century, beginning with the Western Sahara formerly being known as the Spanish Sahara. A couple of things also to keep in mind, first and most prominently, is that during the 20th century, specifically the decades between the early 1900s to the 1970s, the calls for the territory were from all the aforementioned parties. The Moroccans claimed that the territory was theirs prior to colonial intervention. The Mauritanians held similar arguments to their northern African neighbors, with this claim being far weaker. Spanish maintained the authority over the region for commercial and political reasons as a colonial power, and the local Sahrawi people, while maintaining some allegiance with the Moroccan people against Spanish forces, claimed the territory as their birthright, as it was so for their forefathers. Now, Spain, as a declining colonial power in the region and the globe moreover, was under increased pressure from the international community, especially the United Nations, to resolve the issue with the Ifni people and their determination, while similarly finding a solution to the dispute over land and territory in the Western Sahara with the Moroccans and the Mauritanians, while also considering the perspective of the local populace, that being again the Sahrawi people. The United Nations missions also had been calling for a referendum to be held in December of 1966. Ultimately, the calls for a referendum from the United Nations were stalled due to disputes with both the government of Mauritania and Morocco, but led to the United Nations General Assembly's Resolution 3292, requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice in December 13th, 1974. Now, the International Court of The Hague would deliver a decisive decision, essentially confirming that they could find no evidence that either party had claim to the land, recognized prior allegiance of certain Sahrawi tribes to the Moroccan monarchy in the past, but also maintain that the principle of self-determination through the free and genuine expression of the will of the peoples of the territory. However, King Hassan of Morocco still proceeded with the Greater Morocco policy, leading to the Green March, wherein 350,000 volunteers from Morocco marched into Western Sahara, with the king routinely maintaining his government sovereignty over the territory given previous allegiances to his forefathers years prior. Spanish, who would grow weaker as the 20th century progressed, and its dictator Francisco Franco, who had promised to introduce a referendum to the United Nations, sanctioned the Madrid Accords, which would divvy up the territory between Morocco, which would get 2/3 of the northern territory, and Mauritania with the lower southern third. The concerns of the local Sahrawi were largely unconsidered in this process, a process that was ultimately contested by the Polisario Front and the PUN. The PUN standing for the Partito de Unión Nacional Saharaui. The latter party will not be spoken on for this video for reasons relating to their lack of major support. As with the Polisario, we can see their support even to this day, but discerned even as back as United Nations report in 1975. Speaking of the Polisario, this video hasn't really addressed them, and they are the largest or singular body in Western Sahara as representatives of the Sahrawi people. Now, the history of the Polisario can be traced back to the Mohammed V University in Rabat, with a group of Sahrawi students that initially began their work as advocates for Spanish independence, which was not specifically limited to the independence of Western Sahara and the Sahrawi people. The group gradually shifted away from this ideology, moving more towards general independence from Spain and surrounding states for the Sahrawi people during the 70s, which was marked by political upheaval in the Moroccan region and other northern African states, making the election of El Ouaili into the first Secretary General quite crucial. Guerrilla warfare or asymmetrical warfare is the modus operandi of the Polisario Front, and politically campaigning for the independence of the Sahrawi is overwhelmingly supported by its compatriots in the Sahrawi community. However, locally, the organization was more supported from the younger generation. However, even with this in mind, we cannot forget that according to United Nations reports, there was support from elder groups and local sheikhs. Today, the Polisario Front is almost universally supported in Western Sahara by the Sahrawi people, and with that in mind, they still continue the asymmetrical warfare to this day, all in an effort for independence from their northern African neighbors, which once included countries like Mauritania and internationally countries like Spain, but now almost exclusively are tied to relations with Morocco. This desire for independence and the increased Moroccan nationalism in the northern region of Western Sahara during the 1970s, with the Green March in mind, was one of the primary rationales behind the Polisario Front announcing the establishment of the SADR in February of 1976. 3 years later, in 1979, Mauritania organized for peace with the Guerrilla Front. However, while the Moroccan government would eventually recognize the Polisario Front as an entity, has denounced the SADR as claimants of the land to this day. The issue now boils down to the idea of a Western Saharan referendum, especially since the introduction of historically Moroccan nationals and the region following the Green March of 1975. With this all in mind, it's also important to reflect back on the first segment of this video, and that was on Oped Bapela. The issue in that regard, of course, can now be seen in the reality that the Polisario Front as a revolutionary group have ties with many other revolutionary groups, including the ANC. The issue in the Western Sahara now becomes ever more convoluted. The way forward ever more so, given, of course, the reality of a Western Sahara referendum and the issues therein, most notably what constitutes an indigenous inhabitant of the region. That is a contested subject by both the Moroccan government and the Polisario Front. On that note as well, it also should be noted that this video serves merely the purpose of enticing you, the viewer, to go and do your own research. There's a lot of research to do, but it's not ever so grandiose that one cannot engage. Is United Nations reports, you can read them going all the way back if you know how to look. I'll link some of them in the description as well, in terms of some of the sources that I have utilized for this video, so you can do your own research and double check what I have stated here. And I want that to be the main message of this. This is not a video that you can say, okay, I now comprehend the entire issue from the jump, because even myself, I cannot say that. There's so much to get into on this topic, because the issue in Western Sahara can be traced into a greater issue of discussion on the African Union and how it recognizes states in the early African Union post-colonial period, and also go into discussions on diplomacy on the African continent, especially in the Northern African region, a greater discussion on Northern Africa in the context of the Western Sahara, given the Arab Spring, given the issues in Algeria, Morocco. There's so many other discussions that can be given on this topic, but I'm going to limit myself to this primarily because I'm tired. This is 1 a.m. in the morning I'm doing this recording, and the other reason is as well, if I were to go into even greater insight on this topic from even my knowledge, it would take over an hour, and it would require an intense amount of editing and an intense amount of research, and I don't think I have the ability right now to do something of that degree, the capacity anyway, but hopefully in the future it can be done. But I think that's all for now. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope it all goes good. Godspeed. Assalamu alaikum.